The main thing we're going to be looking at in this video are the skills that you really need to master, not maths, that you need to really master in order to be good with your finances and to build longer term wealth. This is something I've done quite a lot of research into, and I think there's one thing that is just completely inescapable, and it's one of the things we've talked about endlessly in other videos, which is that it's this consistent application of good personal finance habits. Now, if you listen very closely, I can hear the brains of personal finance influencers from around the land exploding. So the first thing we're going to talk about is opportunity cost. So I think this is an important one to start with, because this is a concept, this is an idea rather than an example. And I think when you start to look at your finances in terms of concepts rather than specific numerical examples, things start to make a lot more sense and you start to get a much more comprehensive view of how you're going to manage your money. So what is opportunity cost? Simply, it's everything you forego when you spend your money. You can basically only spend your money once. The key thing is really to think about, well, what else could I be spending this money on, and is there a better use of that money? Now, this is something we talked about in our last video. It's not necessarily true to say that you can never have nice things. I think that's one thing which, I won't repeat too loudly, because some of the influencers in this space, their heads might explode like they're forming a new intergalactic star. But do you really need to be spending like $700 a month on a car? Could you maybe spend like $300 a month on a car and put $400 into savings? And over the longer term, that's a pretty big opportunity cost. Delayed gratification. So again, this is another concept, basically making a sacrifice in the shorter term for the longer term gain. So the car example that we just went through, perfect example. But, and I'm going to keep saying this, as with opportunity cost, this doesn't mean that you need to live a life of intercontinental ballistic boredom. It's perfectly reasonable to have nice things, provided they don't compromise your longer term financial goals. A Stanford professor in 1972 gave kids marshmallows, and he said to the kids, if you can hold off eating the first marshmallow and then I leave the room and come back, then you can get 2 marshmallows. But this is the more interesting part. In 1990 there was a follow-up study, and so the kids who did better in this, so they were able to practice delayed gratification, had a whole plethora of better kind of life outcomes. They had better educational attainment, they had a lower BMI, they had lower rates of drug addiction, lower rates of alcohol addiction, lower rates of divorce. And so this really highlights that this is just such an important skill to try and master. But just again, so we're clear, you can turn on the bullshit afterburner with this stuff and use it for if you want to spend 30p on a bag of sweets or something. But don't be that person. The difference between value and price. This is one of, I think, the most important concepts in The Millionaire Next Door. Again, this is a book we've recommended in previous videos and I still recommend it. Still think it's worth doing. It's a good read. But here's the thing. Would you rather spend money on a cheap pair of shoes that will last you about 25 minutes, or would you rather spend, I'm not saying you need to go mad, you don't need to get a pair of Louboutins or anything like that, but would you rather spend just a bit more and get shoes that you know are going to last you a couple of years? And this is really the key thing, the difference between price and value. A story that I've told in the past is we had a family friend who was in his 80s and lived out in California, and he paid for him and all of his family to go on a vacation. And I was kind of young at the time, and I said to him, well, this must have cost you a lot of money, why did you do it? And he was just like, I'm 80, like, what else am I going to spend my money on? Knowing when to spend more. Now, if you listen very closely, I can hear the brains of personal finance influencers from around the land exploding. It sounds like some of their brains have just gone supernova, but never mind. Let's say you're self-employed, you can get the cheapest bog standard accountant that costs this much. Okay, but then you could go to another accountancy firm. They're a bit more expensive and maybe they're about here. But one of the big benefits is that they have an in-house tax team. Suddenly the value that you get goes up to here. And so that offset is all that you're really looking for. And so here's a sort of personal example. We had a family friend who was, unfortunately injured and suffered sort of longer-term medical ailments, let's call them. And they decided not to spend money on a good lawyer, despite having money to spend on a good lawyer. That lawyer then missed an opportunity to file all the necessary legal paperwork in court in order to try and get some kind of payout for that. And so they missed out on a potentially substantial payout because they decided to go with the cheaper option. Self-awareness and self-discipline. So if I was to be restored to my factory default settings, I'm not very good at the whole self-control thing. If I see something I like, I will generally want to buy it, and it's something which I've had to really work on. It's something that I have to consciously try quite hard to overcome. So really reflectively hold a mirror up and ask yourself about what is your relationship like with money. So that's the self-awareness part. Now the self-discipline part, because there's no point understanding what opportunity cost is and having that self-discipline to ask yourself those questions when you're making these bigger financial decisions. So self-discipline is the glue that holds it all together, if you like. This is something that James Clear talks about. Again, Atomic Habits. If you are involved in this niche, you'll have seen about 20,000 videos reviewing the book. Here's the TLDR. It's really good. I would recommend it, and small habits make a big difference over a long enough time period. There you go. And this is ultimately the thing. You need to be your own credible sentinel on the watchtower, knowing in your own, being confident in yourself that you will have that self-awareness, you will have that self-discipline to ask yourself these important questions. And the final thing is understanding priorities. Understanding where your priorities lie, because opportunity cost, you can only spend that money once. Once you understand what your priorities are, once you understand what your financial objectives are, that is the genesis, that is the birth of a star when it comes to, that is the big bang of your financial journey. Once you make that decision just here, that trickles down into virtually every other facet of your financial and non-financial life. Once you understand what your financial priorities are, it then informs everything else that we're talking about.